welcome. You're watching Fuelonomics on Money9. I'm Sakshi Batra. This is a show where we'll try and understand the dynamics of the constantly surging fuel prices. And to help us understand the same, I'm joined by Karan Bhasin, who's a policy researcher and who really understands the entire economics and politics behind it as well. Welcome, Karan. Thank you very much for joining in on Money9, which is India's first multilingual platform for personal finance from TV9 Network.
No, the pleasure is entirely mine.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure too. Let us begin by understanding, why are the fuel prices constantly rising? We are seeing that there's a constant upward revision on both the petrol and diesel prices on an everyday basis, and they are, skyrocketing through the roof as well. So help us understand, and our viewers too, that what is the reason behind the constantly surging prices?
It's important to understand a couple of things over here before we go into why oil prices are increasing right now. So if we just go back a couple of months, what happened in the international oil markets was that since most of the world was in a lockdown, there wasn't really demand for crude oil, and you can't stop drilling oil because that just increases cost should you resume drilling at a later point. So there was a lot of accumulation of inventory. Oil supplies remained largely constant even as the demand wasn't there. So oil prices crashed. At the same time, we also introduced lockdown in our country, and state governments were pressed for revenue because they didn't have GST revenues coming in, and the same goes also for the central government. So what happened subsequently was that central government and state government started increasing taxes. Central government increased the excise, which is a flat rate that is levied on petrol and petroleum products, and states simultaneously increased VAT, which is levied as a percentage on the value, right? So both these taxes were increased even though oil prices were low, to ensure that government revenues could be kept as, they could recover whatever they could, because governments needed money to be able to meet the healthcare costs and administrative expenses, and B, provide a stimulus in the event of governments requiring to provide a stimulus at a later date. Now that because you have the demand for oil come back, as economies tend to normalize, so oil prices are on the up trajectory. And what's happening is that while oil prices are increasing, the taxes are more or less the same as they were before, right? So that high taxes is not has not yet been reversed, which is why the prices are sort of hitting new highs. Um, every day there's a
But
revision
what
in the
would be the
international.
reason that, like you correctly pointed out, that, the government needed the money at the time of COVID-19 pandemic, so they continued to increase the excise duty and the VAT as well, even more so that it will not impact the common man's wallet at that point in time, because the price of petrol and diesel ultimately remained same for a whole lot of time. But now that the recovery is happening on the international oil prices, why is it that the government is not reversing these taxes?
I believe a part of it is because government wants to be a bit cautious before rolling back these duties and taxes. Central government, for instance, is hard pressed on revenues, right? And even though central government does levy excise, 41% of it goes to states. So states get a share in centers, from centers levy of excise, and then they also have an equivalent amount of VAT, which they levy. And mind you, states have not really received the kind of compensation that they anticipated on the GST. Whether that is fair, whether that was due or not is a separate issue. We can have a hour-long debate on that. But fact is that states were anticipating that money, and since they haven't received it, they are resorting to high VAT on fuel as a substitute for the same. My sense is that at least the central excise should be cut to some extent, because revenues are back. GST revenues are also back, and I think it's important that we do not overtax a very narrow set of commodity. The reason why that hasn't been done yet is because when it comes to petrol pricing, I believe government is also viewing this tax as a carbon tax, right? Because it leads to emissions, so there should be a higher tax to basically adjust the negative externality effect that use of fossil fuels has, and the government is giving a nudge towards electricity. So the reason why central government may have not cut the excise duty yet could be because they're trying to promote electric vehicles, and they believe that higher taxes or higher cost of petrol and diesel might be a necessary nudge to push people to rapid adoption of electricity vehicles. So those are the two reasons that why the center hasn't slashed excise and why states are not cutting back. And
Okay. Okay, I'll dig deeper and ask you further questions, but before that, ताकि हमारे सभी व्यूअर्स को एक बार आइडिया हो जाए कि जो वो फ्यूल प्राइसेस पे कर रहे हैं उसमें कितने टैक्सेस हैं, कितना इम्पैक्ट उसमें इंटरनेशनल क्रूड ऑयल प्राइसेस का होता है, बेस प्राइस क्या होता है, इसको पूरी तरीके से समझने के लिए हमारी कोलीग प्रियंका संभव ने एक पीस किया था फ्यूल प्राइसेस पर कल, और उसी की झलक हम आपको अभी दे देते हैं शो में, जिससे कि आपको पूरा समझ में आ जाएगा कि पेट्रोल और डीजल प्राइसेस में क्या क्या कंपोनेंट्स होते हैं और क्या प्राइसेस आप पे कर रहे हैं. चलिए फटाफट देखते हैं.
ना थप्पड़ से डर लगता है, ना किसी के प्यार से डर लगता है. इन दिनों तो पेट्रोल की भागती हुई कीमतों से डर लगने लगा है. पेट्रोल पंप पहुंचते ही, टैंक में पेट्रोल जाते ही हाथ में जब बिल आता है तो ऐसे लगता है कि जेब कट गई है. लेकिन जब आपकी जेब कटती है तो क्या आप जानते हैं किसका बटुआ भरता है? मैं हूं प्रियंका संभव और समझते हैं कि आप जब पेट्रोल की कीमत अदा करते हैं तो इस कीमत में कौन कौन से फैक्टर्स जो हैं वो अपनी भूमिका निभाते हैं. तो मैं मान लेती हूँ कि आप दिल्ली में रहते हैं और आज सुबह आपने 89 रुपये 29 पैसे पर लीटर पेट्रोल पर खर्चा किया होगा. अब जब आप 89 रुपये खर्च करते हैं तो जो तेल कंपनी है वो खरीद रही है 32 रुपए के आसपास पर लीटर. तो ये 32 रुपए 89 रुपए 29 पैसे कैसे बनता है? तो इसमें आपको एक्साइज भी देना होता है, एक्साइज ड्यूटी, जो कि जाती है सीधा सीधा केंद्र सरकार की जेब में. तो 32 रुपए के आसपास की एक्साइज ड्यूटी. लेकिन ये मत सोचिए कि सीधा 32 रुपए का हिस्सा जो है वो केंद्र सरकार के पास चली जाती है, क्योंकि एक्साइज ड्यूटी के अलग अलग सेगमेंट्स हैं. बेसिक एक्साइज ड्यूटी है, स्पेशल एक्साइज ड्यूटी और सेस है. तो सेस का जो हिस्सा है वो सीधा केंद्र सरकार लेती है, और बेसिक एक्साइज ड्यूटी और स्पेशल एडिशनल एक्साइज ड्यूटी जो है उसे राज्य सरकारों के साथ शेयर करना होता है. अब एक्साइज ड्यूटी के बाद आपसे एक डीलर जो है उसका भी एक कमीशन आपसे लिया जाता है, जो कि 3 रुपए 68 पैसे के आसपास है. और इसके बाद एक और बड़ा खर्चा वैट जुड़ता है, और ये वैट जो है अलग अलग राज्यों में अलग अलग हो सकता है. दिल्ली में फिलहाल 20 रुपए कुछ पैसे का वैट लिया जा रहा है. राजस्थान का जिक्र मैं पहले कर रही थी, वहां पर जो है इस प्राइस पर जब वैट लगता है ना 36% के हिसाब से, इसीलिए राजस्थान के कई शहरों में 100 रुपए पर लीटर का पेट्रोल है. तो हम दिल्ली पर वापस आते हैं तो ये सारी एक्साइज लग गई 32 रुपए के आसपास, 3 रुपए 68 पैसे का जो है वो डीलर कमीशन लग गया, उसके बाद वैट लगा 20 रुपए 61 पैसे का. और इसीलिए वो जो 32 रुपए में तेल कंपनी ने खरीदा, वो उस पेट्रोल की कीमत जब आप तक पहुंचती है तो 89 रुपए 29 पैसे दिल्ली में बैठ रही है.
Karan, so this was the Money9 shorts that was created by our team, and I hope all of the dynamics that we've put out is exactly what you as an economist also see, that these are the factors that go in when we actually pay the prices of petrol and diesel, when we go out at the petrol bunks as well. But for the common man, how does that person really understand the prices of fuel that they pay? They understand it in the way that, when perhaps the crude oil prices was at $140 to the barrel, I was still paying 70 rupees for my petrol per liter. But now the crude oil prices are half of that, and I'm still paying 100 rupees almost in some of the cities in India. So how do you, make the common person really understand what goes behind it?
Well, the breakup is spot on, and it was mentioned there as well that center also has to share a part of it with states, and once you deduct that, you realize that states are, most states are actually getting a major part of the taxes on crude oil and commodities compared to the central government. And of course, when petrol was at $140, there was an attempt to subsidize it for consumers. Then gradually when international oil prices crashed, governments found a unique opportunity to profit in the sense that they could levy an additional tax while keeping petrol prices in check. What we are witnessing right now is that that entire arithmetic has gone for a toss because we have levied excessive taxes which have pushed prices at record high levels. So for a consumer, it's important to understand that a major part of what you're paying goes for tax goes in the form of taxes, and states tend to be the biggest beneficiaries from it rather than the central government. Central government also benefits in it, but it's more 50-50 or 60-40, 60 in the favor of states and 40 in the favor of central governments in a lot of places. And center anyway levies a very flat sort of rate, right? So what happens is with VAT, which is a percentage, right? So when the price goes up, the component of VAT also goes up because VAT is levied as a fixed percentage of the total value. So that's again something that we need to keep in mind. And internationally, oil prices are going to be range bound. They will be between $50 to $70 per barrel because excess supply coming in from US, etc. So we have to get comfortable with the idea that we will have to pay a higher share of fuel taxes because state governments are going to continue to levy these high taxes. They may remove some of it right now, but when oil prices go down, they will be introduced back again. So it's just a reality that we have to reconcile it at some point or the other, and there's no two way about it anymore. The emerging consensus is, and carbon taxes are being levied across the world. So if we push for electric vehicles, I think this is a very painful way to nudge people towards electric vehicles. But I guess it's a policy decision that has been taken, so there's not much that can be done about it.
Right in saying that perhaps across the world we are paying carbon taxes, but as far as the taxes on these fuel prices are concerned, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we are one among the many nations, one among many nations which are paying the highest amount of taxes on fuel.
That's true, but we also need to keep in mind that direct tax to GDP ratios, etc., are very low in India compared to others. Which is why what I said is that we have a very narrow base, and we tax them way too high than what we should. And what I have been arguing is that we need taxation reforms, direct tax reforms, and to some extent even indirect tax rationalization to correct for this bias. Because the way things are right now, this is a reality that we do overtax a very small proportion of people who end up paying for the large government and its subsidy programs and so on and so forth. But that's just the way things are at the moment. And I mean, there's not much that can be done unless you do taxation reforms.
ऑल्सो करण, अनफॉर्चुनेटली ये एक ऐसे टाइम पर फ्यूल प्राइसेस रिकॉर्ड हाई पर जा रहे हैं जब ऑलरेडी आम आदमी कोविड पैंडेमिक की हिट की वजह से अपने वॉलेट में, अपने सैलरीज में, अपने जॉब लॉसेस से जूझ रहा है, और ये पिंचिंग इफेक्ट जो है इस समय पर आ रहा है. एड ऑन टू इट कि बजट में इस बार एग्री फ्यूल सेस का भी अनाउंसमेंट हुआ, तो ऐसे में एक आम आदमी ना ही केवल निराश है पर वो एक उम्मीद की नज़र से इस समय सरकार को देख रहा है कि ऑलरेडी मैं इतनी मुश्किलों से गुजर रहा हूं, ठीक है, सरकार के भी काफी फाइनेंशियल स्ट्रेच्ड हैं, लेकिन कहीं ना कहीं सरकार को कॉमन पर्सन के वॉलेट के ऊपर जो असर पड़ रहा है उसके ऊपर सोचना पड़ेगा, एंड मे बी कोई और ऑप्शन सोचने पड़ेंगे इफ नॉट रिड्यूसिंग द टैक्सेस.
वेल ये जो सेस इंट्रोड्यूस करा था, एक्चुअली इसने प्राइस इंक्रीज नहीं करा क्योंकि ड्यूटी का कंपोनेंट ब्रॉडली सेम रहा, बट व्हाट सेंटर डिड वाज बाय इंट्रोड्यूसिंग सेस इट डज नॉट हैव टू शेयर दैट अमाउंट विद states. My sense is that probably we should reduce excise, and if needed थोड़ा सेस का component expand कर सकते हैं if center is more concerned about its revenue positions being overstretched. But as I said कि we are paying a very high taxes at the moment, and there is a need to sort of bring it to a more acceptable level where it still encourages electricity consumption, but at the same time is not a drag on the personal consumption of individuals. But largely, I don't see a spillover effect of oil prices on inflation because that relationship doesn't exist. I mean, it hasn't existed in a very long time, and I would be personally surprised if that really happens. But you're absolutely right that because there have been nominal wage cuts, a reduction in the excise duty makes sense. But I slightly disagree. I think center can reduce excise, and that is easier option. But what we really need is for states to slash VAT, because they have a lot more space there, and states also need to take a relook at some of their expenditures. Abhi kya hai, center is talking about disinvestment and privatization, but states also have a lot of sick PSUs, and they also tend to incur a lot of wasteful expenditure at the expense of taxpayers, right? So center pay we scrutinize a lot, but because there's no similar amount of scrutiny for states, they tend to get away with it. So I think government must be held accountable, and we should raise this issue, but we should raise it in front of state governments, because state governments are also responsible for the hike in VAT. I believe Assam recently reduced VAT. So if Assam can do it, then why can't other states do it? So let other states also slash VAT, and push for expenditure rationalization on their part.
एब्सोल्युटली पॉइंट वेल टेकन देयर। लेकिन क्या जीएसटी भी एक आंसर हो सकता है? कई लोग कहते हैं कि जीएसटी का जो स्लैब है, अपर स्लैब ही 28% तक का है, तो कुल मिलाकर भी अगर देखा जाए, अगर पेट्रोल और डीजल को इसके अंदर लाया जाए तो शायद टैक्सेस कम हो जाएंगे।
बट अगर इसके अंदर पेट्रोल एंड डीजल को लेके आएंगे, देन द स्लैब कैन नॉट बी 28%। जैसे अभी हमने ब्रेकअप देखा, अप्रोक्सीमेटली थर्ड ऑफ द प्राइस इज टैक्सेस, right? So imagine you will levy a 28% GST, and then on top of that you will have to levy a very high compensation cess to arrive at that particular value. On top of it, you take away the sort of flexibility of states to introduce VAT, etc. on the component. So my guess is कि GST is a preferred option. It should be in the GST. But it is a very unlikely option given the political situation, given the political scenario. States will not want to let go of that power. So unless there is great political pressure which is exerted by the tax-paying population of this country, which typically tends to be very silent. We just pay our taxes and get like we are okay, right? We don't get public education, public healthcare facilities, but we are happy paying taxes, and so on and so forth. So unless we become vocal about putting governments accountable in terms of how they spend our money, I don't see that happening.
क्वेश्चन टू यू करण, एज एन इकोनॉमिस्ट, आप हम सभी से बेहतर इस चीज़ को समझते हैं कि कभी कभी जब हम बात करते हैं फ्यूल कंजम्पशन का, तो वो एक तरीके से इकोनॉमी की ग्रोथ को दर्शाता है, इकोनॉमी में जो डिमांड बढ़ रही है उसको दर्शाता है। लेकिन लगातार अगर ये फ्यूल प्राइसेस बढ़ते रहेंगे और अगर सरकार की तरफ से कोई इंटरवेंशन इसमें टैक्सेस कम करने के लिए नहीं आता है, तो अल्टीमेटली मोबिलिटी भी इफेक्ट हो सकती है। उसका क्या असर पड़ेगा इकोनॉमी पे अगर इसी तरीके से प्राइसेस बढ़ते रहे?
Well, mobility, because oil की consumption is very inelastic, so I don't see mobility पे direct effect आएगा, but indirect effect आएगा through different channels. For instance, if cost of transportation goes up, then our exports might not be competitive, right? And if our exports are not competitive enough, then there's a problem. So you may not want to sort of produce as much and transport as much. Then there is inter-regional mobility. When costs go up, local production becomes more viable within the country, which creates segregated markets, right? So economies of scale kind of becomes very difficult. Now those are second, third order effects जो आते हैं, which are felt after a particular lag, right? My hope is, or my sense is, that by the time that lag effect would even begin to emerge, government's revenue positions, whether state or central, will look a lot better, and a lot of these taxes will be reversed immediately. At least states, once they see that GST revenues are up and they are getting their share now, so I think they will start reducing VAT, and we may avoid a situation like that.
Well taken. Thank you very much, Karan, for speaking to us on this very, very important topic and helping us understand the entire dynamics of how the fuel prices are priced in right now and what is the trajectory that we see them going on from here as well. Thank you very much for speaking to us on this special show. So three particular points that Karan has really made over here. He does believe that the government must look at reducing the excise duty at this point in time. More so, he does say that the state governments also have, a larger room where they can reduce the VAT that, and that is something that we must really look forward to. If Assam can do it, then so can the other states. तो एक बार हमें ये भी देखना होगा कि बाकी राज्य सरकार जिनके पास शायद ज्यादा रूम है अपने वैट को कम करने के लिए, जिससे कि अल्टीमेटली आम आदमी का जो फ्यूल प्राइस है या फिर फ्यूल बिल है वो कम हो सकता है, उसके ऊपर नजर रखनी होगी. थर्ड पॉइंट ही डिड मेक वाज दैट डेफिनेटली जीएसटी वुड बी अ प्रेफर्ड रूट. अगर जीएसटी के अंदर पेट्रोल और डीजल को लाया जाता है तो अल्टीमेटली जो हम टैक्सेस अभी पे कर रहे हैं वो रिड्यूस हो सकते हैं, लेकिन उसके लिए भी काफी ज्यादा पॉलिटिकल नुआंसेस और हमें देखना होगा कि क्या राज्य सरकार भी इस पावर को गिव अप करने के लिए तैयार होते हैं या नहीं. और इसी की तरफ आगे बढ़ने में ये जो डिबेट है ये एक ऑनगोइंग डिबेट है कि राज्य सरकार क्या अपनी ये पावर देना चाहेगी या नहीं, और इसीलिए अभी तक जीएसटी के अंदर हम पेट्रोल और डीजल प्राइसेस को नहीं दे पाए हैं. हालांकि एक पॉजिटिव बात जो करण ने और बताई है कि क्रूड ऑयल प्राइसेस बहुत ज्यादा आगे जाते हुए बढ़ते हुए नहीं नजर आएंगे, तो स्टेबिलिटी इंटरनेशनल क्रूड ऑयल प्राइसेस से है, तो हम ये मानकर चल सकते हैं कि बहुत ज्यादा हाइक जो है एक्साइज ड्यूटी पर या फिर वैट पर या फिर इंप्रूवमेंट जो हमारे डोमेस्टिक टैक्सेस हैं उस पर ज्यादा बढ़त अभी हमें नहीं देखने को मिलेगी. तो थोड़ी स्टेबिलिटी हम एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं आगे जाते हुए. चलिए इसी के साथ हम इस खास शो को यहीं समेटते हैं, लेकिन लगातार खबरों का सिलसिला जारी रहेगा मनी 9 पर.